Well, thanks for staying with us here on Sunrise Live on E! On this Friday morning as we continue with our conversation. Obviously, it's time to get into our issue of the week discussion, talking about the country's economy, which is currently standing on a knife's edge, downgrades to junk status, unemployment sitting at about 27.7%, and now recently slipping into a recession, or technical recession for that matter, with GDP contracting by 0.7%. The question bodes how many, or by young people, and young people want to know exactly where does all this leave me? Where do I fit into it? School leavers as well as graduates already faced with so many hurdles, as well as the unemployment rate, which is seeking to rise, as well as the discouragement rate seeking to rise as well around young people. So breaking the stereotypes and perhaps encouraging a mindset change this morning, we are joined in studio to talk about how do we salvage the issue and how can we improve the livelihood of young people and also the unemployment rate thereof. We've got SME consultant Dr. Roche Mamabolo, as well as senior economist from IHS, as well, Thea Fourie. And we get to invite you, as always, to participate in conversation with us. Remember to give us a call on 011 447 1742, alternatively 1620. Also, feel free to leave your comments on our Facebook as well as our Twitter pages. It really is all about you. We are building up to Youth Day, so all your youth issues will be tackled around this time. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us this morning. And perhaps, Thea, we should start off with you. You know, it's so funny when you're taking in statistics, and I was doing a little bit of reading about this topic that we're going to be getting into, but I feel like statistics mislead us in the sense that we don't necessarily know the number, so we're not able to quantify. So we say 60% or 50% of young people are unemployed, but we don't actually know what it means in life terms, you and I, ordinary people. And statistics are looking at how 3 million people currently, 3 million young people in this country are not educated, not trained, not employed. How then do we move forward from this matter?
The question for you, yes, no, I think that is absolutely a shocking and discouraging number. And it's got so much implications for the economy going forward over the long term. And it's an urgent matter that needs to be addressed, because these young people could fall in the trap of being unemployed for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. 3 million of them currently.
3 million of them never being employed, never have the opportunity to work and get training and some experience, and therefore they will be in the social trap for the rest of their lives. So it's really a discouragement for the potential of this country, the potential growth of this country, this constraint we are facing with our youth unemployment.
Yeah, and I mean, so obviously at the back of that, and writing at the back of that, because we just really want to give a real picture of what's going on the ground right now. At the back of that, statistics are also showing that when it comes to employment, employers nowadays, and simply because of the economic crisis or economic downturn, they want highly skilled individuals in the labor market. And what they've done subsequently is to increase the level of employability criteria, right? So in other words, Roche, when we're looking at where things are currently standing, the highly skilled that we're looking for, young people are not necessarily qualified in that area, because we're still turning people not suited for the fourth industrial revolution. Touch base with that.
I think that's going to be a huge challenge, isn't it? That, I mean, it talks to our education, the quality of our education. Those who come out of, matric, can't even access, basic employment. Before, in the 80s, when you finish matric, you were sort of guaranteed of a job. But today, matric doesn't guarantee you a job anymore. And it's actually even getting worse with the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, where factories now are going to be operated by machines. So how we define work, or the concept of a job, is changing, and it's becoming increasingly more difficult for young people to access jobs. I mean, if you look at, for instance, Africa having the largest young population in the world, right? And if we are going to mechanize factories, where are these young people going to get jobs from? Right? Yeah. So it changes the whole game. We need to start rethinking, how do we train these young kids? Where are these jobs going to come from? Because certainly they're not going to come from your mining industries or industries.
Well, manufacturing industry is currently shrinking as well. Mining industry is shrinking as well, given the lack of productivity for that matter.
So it's going to be a very challenge that young people, we need to now think out of the box. How do we train, these young people, not necessarily for the jobs or getting employment, but how do we train them to start creating their own jobs? How do we train them to start using technology to their advantage? Because the world now, is small due to the fact that we are globalized. How do we work out a way or a mechanism where we equip our kids not to wait for someone to pick them up, but to pick themselves up? And I think that's the challenge going forward.
But the policy makers, and this is where, and you can't necessarily blame the private sector for this as well, because it comes from a policy perspective, it comes from an implementation curriculum perspective, from the education perspective as well. So when you guys are sitting on the show this morning, and you go back to your livelihoods, I know that you are actually studying this, and obviously you are an economist when it comes to this. Does government not listen to the fact that, wait guys, we are working on the 4th industrial revolution, and yet we are on the 2nd industrial revolution in terms of the way of operative mechanisms? In other words, we are turning people to work in mass-produced factories, right? So we are making young people equipped enough to work in a factory. That's the level of our education, not equipped enough to work in a diversified economy.
Yeah, that is definitely a problem, like the colleague here highlighted. I think government, any policy changes regarding employment, you implement now, and you're only going to see the benefits after a generation which has been in school. So you have to think about, what is the world going to look like in 10, 15 years' time?
Yeah.
Where is the job opportunities going to be in 15 years' time? And surrounding that, you make the policies now regarding what skills are you going to need, how should education be placed to supply in that needs in long term. And like,
so in other words, this was not done. In other words, considering the fact that we're in the that we're going to go into the 4th industrial revolution, considering the fact that personnel capital or human capital has to be diversified now, because you need to cut costs, and cutting costs means that you have to operate machinery. That was not considered when we were structuring what kind of education our children were going to actually receive.
And they're not considering now either, and that's the problem. If we don't make an assessment now, we're going to once again miss the opportunities, because like my colleague said, Africa is by 2050 is going to have one of the largest populations in the world. What does this mean for South Africa, who's got a lot of competitive advantage? What does this mean for our transport industry? What does this mean for our food industry? What does this all mean? And a lot of these people are going to be in East and West Africa. How are we going to get our products there? How are we going to make use of that opportunities? How should we place our labor force now and our education system now to supply in these needs, so that the Chinese does not do it on our behalf?
Okay, so we know the problems. So policymakers are not necessarily designing policies with the future in mind. In other words, currently right now, we're turning kids that are going to be working in factories, and we're not turning kids that are going to be able to have a competitive edge from a global perspective. Fact, right? Fact, the number of people, young people that are not employed, that are not educated, that are not trained, are sitting at 3 million currently, as we and me sit in the table right now. Fact. Then should we not then be looking at how young people can change the existing status quo? In other words, how then do we start bringing about that mindset shift? Surely, if the situation is bleak, I need to shift my mindset, Roche?
I think it talks to a whole number of issues. I mean, one of the things should be, for instance, entrepreneurship. Are we celebrating entrepreneurs? Are we pushing the culture of entrepreneurship in our country? Or is it a, by the way, I can't get a job, no one can employ me, therefore, let me just try this entrepreneurship thing. And I think also it talks to, are we producing opportunity-driven entrepreneurs, or are we producing survivalist entrepreneurs? At the moment, it looks like it's survivalist, right? And survivalist, mentality is, I just need to get something to eat today, and tomorrow I'll see what happens. We need to be
driving... The lack of sounding unpopular, does that mean that that's why we have the rise of the trenderpreneur? This is the risk of sounding unpopular.
That's one of them, right? But I think we also need to come up with, look, we have quite a number of challenges as a country. And as an entrepreneur, those challenges should be opportunities for you, right? And I think by changing that mindset of young people, they need to be looking at those challenges as opportunities to say, how can I use these opportunities for myself to build a business that will only grow, but also, create industries around that. I think the misconception has always been that, development comes before innovation, right? And I think that's the wrong approach. Innovation drives development. It's when young people start businesses that grow, and through that growth, industries come, and through those industries, development comes. Right? And of course, government has to play their role in setting that enabling environment. But it starts with innovation, young people looking at these opportunities and taking them. We see quite a lot of other our African counterparts coming from other countries coming here and taking those opportunities, right?
Yeah.
There are opportunities in our country. We just need to, start educating differently our young people.
Well, we're going to be diving further into that and also finding practical solutions in terms of how do we get young people out of the stuck mindset, because, I mean, the report as well shows that the discouragement amongst the youth has increased by 8%. That means we're sitting with a lot of hopeless people, or people that are feeling hopeless. So we established just before the news with Kimberly Flanagan that entrepreneurship is the way to go. And you've heard from one of our callers, Excellent, saying that, yeah, but then we do it, but the policies are actually blocking us. So the barriers to entry are actually blocking us. So here's a question that is being implemented in West Africa, in East Africa, but somehow SADC region is failing. How then do we succeed as young people outside of government policymakers?
I think, it's always one of those, it talks to the entitlement issue, that, young people feel that they're entitled to certain benefits from government, right? You're mentioning, East and West Africans don't have that entitlement mentality, because when they go to the government says, but we don't have anything. You come to us.
They don't have policies.
We don't have policies.
No.
We don't have anything. So you're on your own. So, and I think that's where Nollywood comes from, right? Where Nigerians decided they're going to build an industry despite whether they get support or not from the government. East Africa, in Kenya, for instance, where technology is thriving without the support of government. But when it comes to the SADC region, we want government to play that big role, right? But, let's say, for instance, that government plays that role. And I think one of the things that I struggle with when it comes to government is service delivery, in terms of, government has got the good intentions to say we'll support our entrepreneurs. But when it comes to implementation, right, the story of South Africa, good policies implementation, we come very short. Paying entrepreneurs on time within 30 days remains a huge challenge. And if you give an entrepreneur a business, but you don't pay him or her within 30 days, it can actually cripple that business.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways. On one hand, entrepreneurs, especially in the SADC region, need to, take away that mindset that we need support from government and start doing things on their own.
I'm going to ask Thea this one.
Yeah.
How then do we start, practically now, how then we start implementing tools? So let's say that I'm an entrepreneur. I do have an idea. I see even on Facebook, people are speaking about the fact that they've got ideas. They can be innovative. They want the support. How then do they practically make it without the support in the current technical recession with the unemployment rate, especially for young people sitting at the position that it's in right now?
Well, if I were an entrepreneur and I'm struggling with this constraint, but I just want to confirm with my view with my colleague. Yeah. You cannot be successful if government do not supply some support to an entrepreneur in the sense of your competitiveness. So if you have electricity supplied at a much higher cost than in East Africa, you're not going to be competitive. So government will have to play a role there. But I would make use of the global environment and technology. And I think if I have those constraints, I will definitely see if there's not possibilities across the board. Because I think if you look at a company like Microsoft, who's doing so much to develop Africa's infrastructure regarding access to the internet and things like that, I will tap into programs like that where international players are supporting you if government is not doing that job for you. But I just want to accentuate, you have to have an efficient government to supply services that you are going to need to produce your product.
You mentioned a very valid point there, Lungela, saying that, look, you've done the necessary work, you've done the groundwork, as you've heard from them, especially when it comes to the land. They've asked for the funding, but when it comes to a policy perspective, it almost appears as though they've been neglected from the conversation that we're having. Lungela, thanks, they've listened up on your television set. So how then do we start, how do we tackle that matter effectively?
I think policy has to be relooked at. I think one of the things that I'm very passionate about is actually driving the support or creating an enabling environment for entrepreneurship to thrive in the country. Yeah. So
I have a controversial question. Yes. Policy, we just established at about past 7 that policy takes about 3 years or 5 years before it can be implemented. By that time, where will we be as a country? So if policy right now does not serve the needs of the people right now, what are the people to do right now?
Hence I said earlier on that innovation precedes development.
Got you.
And I think that's where young people need to continue building a base on the ground, building those prototypes, getting that market. Because what you don't want is, you don't want to be sitting with a situation where we have a right policy, but you don't have the right technical people on the ground to actually exploit those policy opportunities. And this is what we're sitting with, in our country, where, NEF, IDC, and all those other, loan-giving institutions can come and say, we have given loans, right? We have given quite a number of loans since 1994, right? But we're still sitting with a high unemployment rate in our country. What's the issue? And the issue comes back to education. It comes back to skills, that we've been giving people those loans, but they're not really equipped to run sustainable and growth business.
Good, because I'm going to come to you now, Anthony, and say that, okay, let's say that education and being able to skill our people. Let's say that the generation Y, right, currently, the Y generation is in a dire straits. So in other words, we have to be helping them reprogram. How then do we start reaching out to that individual who is 10 years old or 8 years old so that they don't follow in our footsteps in terms of decision making and skills making? In other words, how then do we start equipping them and capacitating them? If I'm at home, do I teach them how to code? What do I do practically so that they don't follow in the footsteps that we're currently sitting with?
Like I said, I think I will definitely make use of the global environment and all the information that these days you can find on the internet, all the kind of extra programs that you can do for your children to make sure that they actually achieve good marks in school, which will open up the possibility.
Should I be thinking of sending my children to Harvard, for example, instead of a local university? Should I be thinking of engaging more in fellowships and making my kids participate in fellowships so that they can have a broader perspective of what's going on in the global community?
You don't even have to go to London these days to study for Harvard. You can do it online. You can sit in your home. But then again, government must make sure that data to do this does not cost too much. And that's where government plays its role. So it's possible for any child to actually register online and study online at Harvard, get a Harvard degree sitting in your home in Africa. But again, I need to download the YouTube videos. I need to run the course. And for that, I need cheap data. So those are the little things that government can do to make life much easier for children. And I do think as a parent with a child in school, I think you can demand efficient schooling.